Welcome to the Pineapple Perspective, hosted by yours truly, Troy Hooper. This is always sponsored by Pepper Lunch Restaurants, and I don't do commercials in my podcast, so I just say it at the outset. If you're a multi-unit franchisee or you're interested or have history in being a multi-unit franchisee, we would love to talk to you about partnering with Pepper Lunch at pepperlunchrestaurants.com/franchise. That's the end of the commercial. Let's get into a real conversation with an excellent hospitality specialist. I want to welcome Steve Fortunato to the show.
Thank you, Troy. Really happy to be here, man.
Steve and I met at a kind of a private event at a small summit, a day event where Steve was the one of the guest speakers brought in by the Zoller Law Group. Anthony Zoller, those in Southern California probably know, he's a preeminent hospitality industry, employment law practice, has a lot of lawyers and is growing. So congrats to Anthony. But I got the great pleasure to hear Steve speak on a panel and really bring a lot of value to a room of hospitality operators and executives. And we thought, man, we got to get this guy on our show. He's got a lot to share. And I think there's a lot here that probably doesn't come to my show very often, Steve. So, being an author, not only being an operator and owning catering and event venues and restaurants in your history, but being an operator, being a thoughtful hospitality specialist, you got a lot of history and you're doing a lot of stuff. And I think you're focused in some areas that are new. So we're going to get into that today. But Steve, the first question we ask every guest is, what does hospitality mean to you?
Thank you, man. I'm really happy to be here. Hospitality is simple for me. It just means valuing people.
Shortest answer on the show. Excellent job.
Yeah, it's really an energy it's an intention. I think hospitality is an intention, and it's the intention to make people feel valued with whatever it is that you're offering, whether that is a plate or a design or a seat on a plane or a hairstyle at a salon or an itinerary that you've presented. It's just intending to make the recipients of whatever you've prepared feel valued by what you've prepared for them.
Yeah, I love that. That's a beautiful answer, actually. I love the bringing the word value into it and making them feel valued. We get a lot of answers, get a lot of dancing around how we make people feel, but I think that was straight to the heart and direct. Where did you develop that thesis? Where does that idea for you come from, that it's really about bringing others value and how you serve them?
That won't be as short of a question. I believe that I have had several experiences where I felt valued by a customer service provider or an architect or a barista or a gate agent getting on a plane. And in spending my life in this industry in Los Angeles, one of the energies that I had to get honest with myself that I was feeling was a desire for what our company was doing, the way we approached service, the way we approached hospitality and dish composition. There was a desire for us to establish ourselves, to be recognized, to be noticed. And, LA is a city of organizations within this industry that are noticed. And in all vulnerability, Troy, I wanted our company to be noticed. I had a bit of an awakening 5 years ago. This is my 34th year in this industry. My first job in a restaurant was when I was 14. And I had a bit of an awakening 5 years ago. So that is 29 years into being in this industry. And I took an honest inventory of those desires and my desire for our company to be valued. And I realized that at the same time, I was wanting our clients to feel valued. And in that awareness, I saw a conflict of interest. And I realized that it is impossible to try to get value while also trying to give value at the exact same time. I realized someone has to go first. I think the desire to feel valued is universal. We all want to feel valued. That's human nature. The problem is, similar to breathing, if you are out of breath, what you need is your next breath. But the only way you get that breath is to give the breath you have away. It creates a cycle. And in that desire, that universal desire we all have to feel valued, someone has to go first and say, I'm going to value you first. And in doing that, it creates this virtuous cycle where we end up feeling valued by having value to others. And I think that was when a clear definition for me of what hospitality is dropped in. And I realized that quite simply, after a lifetime in this industry and reading books and philosophies from other professionals, hospitality could be simply defined as the intention to make other people feel valued.
All right. Well, we're going to get a little deep on this one because I really want to know what was the impetus? What was the trigger? What caused that introspection and that inventory taking 5 years ago for you?
I would say it was a mental, emotional, intellectual convergence of all these things. As you know, running a company is challenging. And part of my weekly reset is surfing every week. And, there's something about when you quiet the noise, you can hear things in a different place. And I was sitting out on my surfboard after, 14 years of running this company and feeling the challenges of running a company, feeling the challenges of continually marketing, continually hitting sales numbers, continually increasing your relationships. And I was honestly, Troy, I was just frustrated. I was tired. I was frustrated. I was probably a little bit embittered at opportunities that we couldn't get or seemed to elude us. And my lower self was looking at my competitors thinking, well, we do a better job than they do. And I just wasn't in a good space. And that is when I just asked myself, well, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? And I realized I was trying to accomplish two things. I was trying to make my clients feel valued, and I was trying to get value for my company. And that's when it sounds funny, man, but it just dropped in. I was like, oh, you can't do both of those things at the same time. And that was kind of how it happened. And what that really did was it reset for me the North Star of what it is that I was trying to accomplish as an individual, as a founder, as an owner, but also what I wanted our organization to accomplish. Obviously, I want our organization to grow. I want our marketing to succeed. I want our strategic alliances to expand. But I realized that if I was going to feel authentic in our mission, authentic in what I said to our company, authentic in what I said to our clients, I had to be singular about my intentions, or at minimum, create a hierarchy of my intentions and say my highest intention is to make other people feel valued, my team, my vendors, of course, my clients, and recognize that if we go first in doing that, we will get what it is that we ultimately want. This shift wasn't about moving from normal business desires to altruism. It's not that all of a sudden we didn't care about our sales or we didn't care about our impact. It was just in recognizing that the way that we get there is by creating the right priorities.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I study, especially in marketing, but I study a lot of businesses over my career. I got the chance to work at Procter and Gamble as an executive and see that they don't sell products. Procter and Gamble
Yeah.
sells life,
Yes.
lifestyle,
Yes.
solutions, a vision, a feeling, right? And that, by the way, their products will help you enhance or enlighten that thing, hopefully. And that's how they get the sale. But, as a consultant for a long time, one of the first things I've always said to every operator, restaurateur, hotelier, whatever, is if you're chasing the penny, you're going to be counting pennies and not, millions. I mean, at the end of the day, yes, you have to have good financial controls and all the, but if your intent is transactional, you're going to have a problem with sustainability and resiliency, particularly when times change and trends change, or external forces come pressuring down on you, COVID, economic, political, whatever those things may be. So I love your answer because I align with that. I resonate with that a lot, in that just give without expectation. I give as selflessly as I can without expectation. Does it cross my mind that there could be an opportunity, an upside, a potential referral? I don't, sure, all of those things are possible, but it's not the intent. If you lead with the intent of transacting, then you're going to be chasing transactions
That's right.
and not really generating relationships, referrals, a culture, a brand, quite frankly, being known, as you were saying, right or wrong, or for the right reasons or wrong. I know some of the people that you think about when you think about the event and catering space in Los Angeles, and some of them have deservingly earned their position, and some maybe not as such. Despite themselves, they achieve something maybe by accident.
There's two things that went through my mind as you were speaking. The one is that I think there are certain things that we think are philosophies or concepts, but they exist irrespective of us agreeing with them. I might not agree with the concept of gravity, but if I jump off a building, the law of gravity is going to kick in. So we are in the food business, and we know that the cycle of planting and picking is a law of nature. It is not a philosophy. If you plant carrot seeds, you are not going to pick apples. It's a law. So when you said, you know, if you are going after transactions and you have a transactional mindset, transactions are what you will get. There might be some of your listeners that are like, well, I'm not really sure about that. And I would just say it is a law of nature, irrespective of your belief to it. When you sow and put into the soil of your business a transactional mindset, then what you will pick are transactions. The other thing that went through my mind as you were speaking, and you would be able to tell me much better as a former team member of Procter and Gamble, but in my just cursory study of Procter and Gamble, their products have just adapted and adapted and adapted and adapted and changed, but their mission and their why has stayed the same throughout decades. And that is why I think that the centering of a timeless intention is really the safest foundation we can establish for our businesses. Because if we are chasing innovation, if we are chasing trend, those are moving targets, and we can adapt our products. We can pivot our products. We can change our products. But when we've established this is the intent of this organization, it gives us sort of a base from which to remodel and repaint the room.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of examples when you look at longevity in business. Any of the big ones with long-term staying power, we're talking about 100 years plus on the IBMs of the world. And then you look at the ones that have failed or really struggled, whether it's a Xerox or a Kodak that were massive for 100 years before I came along.
Yes.
But they
The
quote,
good guys.
yeah, but they
Remember the
quote,
good guys? Remember
yeah,
getting?
yeah, some of them, Sears and Kmart, failed to adapt and follow the mission. And if the mission is a higher ideal, a higher calling, so to speak, a bigger purpose, and you tie your actions to achieving that mission or vision on a micro nano level, if that is always the North Star doesn't have to change, but the path you take to get to the North Star certainly can. There's a lot of ways to get from here to there, and you have to be able to go around obstacles and change course and sometimes go backwards. And I'm a mariner, by the way, so for those that don't know, I spent very large amount of my life on the ocean as a captain and sailing around the world. And so I forgive me for the pointing towards the North Star and the ocean reference, but it applies everywhere, right? Steve, let's take a pause there. We're getting kind of deep. I want to establish for the audience a little bit more about you. Who are we talking to? Give us a little bio. Talk a little bit about where you've come from, and a little bit more about where you're at and what you've been building and what you've built and where you're at today. Because there's a lot about you that's fascinating. Let's give the audience just a little context there.
Sure. Well, I just turned 50, and my first restaurant job was when I was 14. I grew up in Santa Cruz. I grew up in Northern California in the Redwoods with my local wave where I surfed about 6 minutes away. And I came down to Southern California all throughout college. I went to Pepperdine all throughout college. I worked in restaurants, graduated college, worked in restaurants, and was really at a professional crossroads, worked my way up into fine dining. I worked for the Patina Group. I came up in an era where if you were in fine dining, you sort of came up through either Wolfgang's path or Joachim's path. And while I was there, really thinking about what next steps were for me, I had offers of management and sort of going up the ranks in the Patina Group, but just honestly was really unsure of what I wanted. Simultaneously, while I was doing that, I was always hosting. I was hosting in my home. I was a bachelor, but even my take on hosting as a bachelor, it was still my take, and had created a lot of community around the table and a lot of community around hosting. And someone came to me and said, "Have you ever thought opening a restaurant?" And I sat with it, and I realized that hospitality had sort of been chasing me all my life. And I had always sort of seen it as a means to another end. There was other things I wanted to accomplish. And I kind of, Troy, just realized, I think you're running away from your life. And I sort of turned my perspective. And as I did that, doors just began to open. So I set about trying to open a restaurant and started doing LOIs on different spaces. And while I was doing that, I started throwing pop ups. We just didn't call them that at the time because this is early 2007. That term didn't exist at the time. The lines around white tablecloth dining were very firmly drawn. So we were just calling them dinner parties, and we had winemakers coming down from the Central Coast. We stumbled into this model where winemakers were coming to our dinners that were in backyards or museum or gallery spaces, and they would put an order form under the menu, and people would be like, "I love this wine, I want a case." That led to us working with some of the top winemakers in California. Chris Curran was the winemaker at Sea Smoke at the time, Stefan Aseo from La Venture, all that sort of Paso Santinez wine community. And more and more, Troy, we had people coming to those dinners saying, "Man, we just had a wedding. We so wish it could have felt like this," or "We just had my 40th birthday. We so wish it could have felt like this." And I had a lot of judgments around catering, and I said, "Oh, well, we're not looking to open, a catering company. Catering is it's so mediocre. We want to do something, critical and impactful in the city of Los Angeles." And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, I'm a disruptor. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a bit of a maverick. And I just thought, forget the restaurant. I want to open a catering company and sort of close that gap between the great restaurant experience and that culture that I was familiar with and the catered format. The more I thought about it, I found it tragically ironic that you could go to a phenomenal restaurant and it was amazing, but it was just Thursday. And then you could have your wedding and people would say, "Yeah, it wasn't that bad for catering." And I was like, what a tragedy, for these once in a lifetime, once in a decade, once in a year events. The service, the food, the hospitality, it should exceed just the great weekend dinner. And so I opened our first company, Room 40, and that grew and grew, and we had some amazing opportunities. And I think kind of the "oh my god" moment came from the first time we catered for an American president. And my little boutique catering company was now catering for people that had world renown, and we just continued to do that, and it was an exciting journey. Catering companies sort of cut their teeth on relationships with event venues and event planners. So we were working at different event venues, and I thought, I actually want to have my own event venue. And so that's what led to opening of the Fig House. And then we opened another event venue in Orange County called the Harper. And then we started working up in wine country, being the exclusive caterer at wineries. So that's been sort of the operational timeline. And then to go back to the earlier part of our conversation, as these awarenesses began to drop in on what the true meaning of hospitality is, I saw that hospitality transcends an industry. I don't really believe anymore that hospitality is an industry. I always refer to our industry as the food and beverage industry. I believe hospitality is a virtue that long exceeded our industry. And that if hospitality is the intention to make people feel valued with what we've prepared for them, that applies to every industry, every relationship, every encounter. And I would say that my worldview on what hospitality is and what it can be and what it offers us collectively as a society right now, it just blew the doors open on that. And so that's when I wrote the book and have now started to share my belief in the role that hospitality plays in really changing the dynamic of our relationships and of our encounters and of our businesses, obviously.
Well, I think you're in the right place. The entire thesis of this show is that every company, every operator, every founder is in the hospitality business. That
That's right.
you're taking the ideal that every business is in the people business to a higher level. We're not just serving people. That's transactional. That's this for that. Thank you very much. But that we're all in the hospitality business. And it's why I like to interview founders of SaaS companies and vendor, industrial service providers,
Yeah.
and challenge them to say, what does hospitality mean to you? And how do you bring that to life in your business? Because most people wouldn't assume that what you do equals an opportunity to bring hospitality to your business. And whether you do that internally, externally, in both, I'm kind of digging for that, right? And you've summed it up really, really well. Let's talk about this book, The Urgent Recovery of Hospitality. What does that mean? Why did you write it? What are you sharing? What's the lesson here?
The book is really about relationships. It takes the position that when we encounter or when we approach relationships with this mindset of what hospitality is meant to be, it changes the dynamic in relationships. If I show up in a relationship with you with the intention of making you feel valued, with a host mindset, because that's really what hosts do, right? A host, a true host, feels like I'm good, I have enough, I want to share some of what I have with you. And we all want witnessing. We all want validation. We all want to be noticed. We all want to be appreciated. That is universal. But when we come to a relationship feeling like I have enough of those things, I want to share that with you now. I want to share the witnessing. I want to share the validation. I want to share the appreciation with you. I don't need to try to get that from this relationship. That is really a host mindset. It's extending hospitality in that universal space. And I really believe that that changes our relationships. And I think that that more than ever is urgent. I believe that collectively for our society right now, what we need is generosity of intention. When we show up in these relationships with that mindset, it begins to just restore civility. And I think that a restoration of civility, number one, is urgent. Number two, why is it urgent? Is because I think that our collective understanding of what hospitality is diluted right now because we've named the food and beverage industry the hospitality industry. And there are things that have been happening over the last couple of decades in the food and beverage industry that I think have created some confusion as to what hospitality means. I can expand on that if you want to. It's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
little
no,
more controversial, but
yeah, no. I think we all know the world we're sitting in, and that is a topic. I spend a lot of time with other CEOs of all kinds of companies of all sizes, and it's a constant conversation. It's still something that comes up a lot, which is how do we infuse hospitality back into our business? There's this great fear of AI and technology and kiosks and things, and there's ways to do it, and it's about intention. It's about when you start that process, what is your goal? Yes, convenience. Yes, cost savings. Yes, labor savings. Sure. But what's your intention for the end result to the end user? If you have an intention and a goal to achieve, then the way you get there will likely take a path that is hospitable and is of good intent and has the right mindset along the way. Talk a little bit about some of the sections of the book, a couple of the different concepts within the book that you really focus on. When you were on stage at that summit that day or that little get together banquet, you definitely had a few topics that were important for you to share. And I think there's some things in this book that you come to it from a different perspective. I think in a way that a lot of people have. So share some of those concepts.
I felt like before you listen to me in the book, you have to trust me. And before you can trust me, I have to be vulnerable and honest. And so the book starts really with confessions about my own journey. It's very autobiographical in sort of my journey in hospitality. I was actually going to name the book Confessions of a Show Off. And it really talks about my own journey in trying to be noticed and affirmed for how good we are at what we do. And so the first section of the book is really me coming to an awareness that there was what I call a vicious cycle that was existing in me, that in coming with our offerings, our company offerings, our plate, our presentation, the training that we do with our servers, the beautiful venues that we have, and coming and trying to say, look at us, that is creating a vicious cycle. Because if I'm trying to serve you and simultaneously while I'm serving you, I'm saying, look at me, that creates a vicious cycle because you're going to be thinking, well, I thought you're serving me. I want you to look at me. And I'm going to consciously or subconsciously be saying, well, I am serving you, but I want you to look at me because of my reputation and my empire and my cookbooks, or do you know what I'm saying? So I identified sort of the vicious cycle that exists when we come with that intention. And then I present an alternative, which is the virtuous cycle. And when we come with the intention to make others feel valued compared to a desire to prove our value, it just sets off an entirely different energy. When I am trying to prove my value, it really creates what I believe is sort of a vicious cycle of entitlement, where I'm feeling more entitled for you to look at me and respect me and appreciate me, and you are feeling more entitled for for me to look at you. And I think that plays out individually. I think it plays out with sort of the customer company relationship. I think it plays out with foreign policy, with existential issues. If two parties are coming together and all they are saying is, look at my interests, of course we want our interests to be validated and noticed, but entitlement, I am so blinded by my own interests that I can no longer see the validity of your interests. And that's when I think we get into vicious cycles. So I talk about that. And then I talk about the alternative, which is a virtuous cycle, and how sort of the energy, the ecosystem changes when I show up to say, I want to make you feel valued. And what ends up happening is that it creates a virtuous cycle of generosity. I really believe that generosity is almost a reflex. If I come into a situation trying to make you feel valued, in feeling valued and nourished and nurtured, you are going to naturally return those feelings to me. You're going to feel grateful. You're going to feel appreciative. And so it kicks off this cycle of what I call the virtuous cycle of generosity. So I talk about those two cycles. I then talk about how we hold these two cycles, because I think a lot of people do come up with frameworks and they present them with this sort of bulletproof, concrete snake oil. If you do this, then this will happen. And that's not really what I believe about the vicious and the virtuous cycles. I don't believe we have this moment of transaction where we all of a sudden become one thing all of the time. I think there are hundreds of interactions like this a day. And I've noticed all the time that I can show up in a relationship feeling entitled in an interaction, or I can show up feeling generous. So I talk about that the way to hold these cycles is not with this mindset of this snake oil mindset that it's formulaic. It's really being aware of our intentions in every interaction. So that's sort of the middle section of the book. And the last section of the book is, okay, I want more virtuous cycles in my interactions. I want more generosity in my interactions. How do I make that happen? And so I then do have a framework that is 4 principles, with each of those principles having practices that we can employ, much like habits that we just train ourselves to do, that increase the likelihood of more virtuous cycles of generosity in our interactions. So autobiography, vicious cycle, virtuous cycle, an awareness that we just need to be noticing these things in our interactions, and then a framework for how we increase the likelihood of those.
So, Steve, we're not going to be talking about Simon here in the near future. We're going to be talking about Steve Fortunato instead of Simon Sinek. What you're talking
It's
about,
generous.
well, what you're talking about applies across any space, any group. It doesn't, let's just stick with business, I guess, and that is industry, right? It doesn't matter what industry. You're talking about the foundations of good leadership, the foundations of support and giving the resources and tools and knowledge and experience needed to a group or a community or employees that are needed. Is this book intended for anybody? I mean,
Anybody and everybody.
it just doesn't sound like it's a hospitality book or a restaurant book for restaurant people, right?
It's definitely not solely a restaurant book. It is a relationship book. One of the things that my editor, my publisher were constantly leaning in on me for is, if you're writing the book to everybody, that's going to dilute your message. And so what I tried to zero in on is, okay, I believe the message applies to all industries, all relational contexts. But who am I writing this book for? I'm writing this book for someone who's wanting to see the dynamics in their relationships, in their relationships with their organization or with their customers or with their coworkers or with the co-committee members on the parent board or with their partners and their spouses. I talk a lot about my marriage and how the dynamic in my marriage changes when, instead of showing up with my wife, trying to get her to notice me and appreciate me and validate me, that happens when I show up with the intention of making her feel valued and her making feel appreciated. So it's definitely not an industry specific book. I believe, again, that hospitality is not confined by an industry. I believe that hosting is universal. A lot of times we don't identify with that word host because we don't see ourselves as someone who's throwing dinner parties or, fashioning napkin rings from the autumn leaves we found outside. Hosting is just that space between someone who's made something and the person who's receiving it. My 12-year-old son was a host last weekend because he had a play date and someone came over to our house. He's hosting in that moment. And so the question isn't whether or not we're hosts. The question is, like you've said, it's of intent. What intention are we bringing into that hosting space? So that's really what the book is designed to communicate.
Yeah, I'm a part of a number of communities, whether it's roundtable, mastermind, just industry CEO groups without really a name. And the difference between any one of those environments or communities or gatherings for the outcome for any individual is dependent solely on what they came to that group with, what intention. They came to that group to get noticed, to spread the word, to sell their thing, to find the franchisee or sell their SaaS product. It's really obvious, right? Versus, and this is a practice thing. This is not something that just happens overnight. I think you have to practice this intention. But if you show up with the intent of giving without expectation of receiving, what value can I bring one person in this conversation today? And you reserve your comment, you reserve your input, your share, and with the intent of actually speaking to that person without calling it out. You listen and you kind of get the gist of where people are coming from and what they're feeling and what their mindset is, what their needs are. And then without saying, "Hey, Steve, I've got something for you," you just set it out there, right? You just generically set it on the table and say, from what I've heard today, I want to share this thought, and I hope that helps somebody. Damn well and good knowing that it fits. You stuck the puzzle piece in the puzzle. For somebody, it's gonna align, and there's gonna be a there. It's really about patience. I listen to Gary Vee a lot. I love when he harps on patience. What does patience mean? It means that knowing, being comfortable in the fact that by having this intention and putting it out in the universe and consistently showing up very clearly and defined as the guy who just shows up to give value and
Totally.
connect people. I'm a connector. I love connecting people. I don't take hourly consulting rates. I don't take coaching jobs. I don't have an ebook for you to buy. I just, if there's a need and I have a way to add to that, and do I think I'm solving your entire problem? Never. But if I can add a piece to that puzzle that you can go on and find another piece of that puzzle, absolutely, and 100%, 1000%, it is going to come back. It is going to come back to me in ways that I can never quantify. There are people talking about you that you don't ever know they're talking about you. And yeah, you hear it in the whispers and the things and okay, whatever. But if your intent is to listen for that, if your intent is to search out those validations, then you're not going to be contributing in the way that you can get the most value out of. So you and I align and resonate very well on that for sure.
Yeah, it's funny when you said if you are showing up to get noticed or to sell something or to proselytize with your product or whatever, it's really obvious. When I was realizing that desire in me to be noticed, the word show off is not necessarily a word that any of us would self-describe ourselves with. It's sort of a word that we used in our playground era, but we have all seen those people. I mean, we see them every day with the attention economy. And
We
there
were
are
those people,
what's that?
Steve. We were those people.
100%. That's what
We
I was saying.
both were those people.
That's why I was going to name the book
At our age, as
Confessions.
I'm about to turn 50 as well, at
Yeah.
our age, youngsters who are listening here, understand that you can evolve and you can change, and your mindset and your intention And your understanding of how greater success is achieved is not by you chipping away at that mountain by yourself with a pitch axe. It's by you getting a lot of other people to pick up pitch axes and chip away at the same mountain with you. So
Totally.
keep going. Sorry.
No, you're good. That's why I was going to call it Confessions of a Show Off, because I realized that, you know, a few seconds ago when you said it's really obvious, we think we mask our intentions through, culturally or socially accepted words and ways of being. And, how many finance guys have you talked to that within 30 seconds of talking to them, they say how many millions of dollars in transactions they did in Q4 of last year, and we get accustomed to people saying these things that have just become socially normative. There's a physician turned therapist, a guy called Gabor Mate, and he wrote a book called The Myth of Normal. And we talking about all the things that we've done and our successes and our achievements and our accomplishments and our accolades, that's just become normative. But at its base, it's showing off, and it's obvious. It's just that we've learned ways to show off that we're just used to. And I realized that I was doing that. I realized, that I would say, so grateful to be included in, Pasadena's 40 under 40. Okay, well, I mean, people say that every single day on social media. But instead of saying, look, I just got featured, they just add, so grateful, they're so honored to be part of it. Now, I'm not ascribing that intention to everybody that does that, but, you know, I, I'll talk about my intention. That was my intention, was to say, look at the accolades that I just got. But we just see, it's become normal to say, I'm really honored to have gotten these accolades. So you're right. It is obvious. Intentions are obvious. And I think, presume ourselves to be better maskers of our intentions than we actually are. Whatever is on the inside, we're like giant television screens. Whatever is on the inside is coming out. Humans are really perceptive and humans are really intuitive, and you can read intentions from people. So that was a long way of just saying I agree with what you're saying. It's really obvious.
Yeah, I'll leave it with this. I'm a tall, big, loud guy, and self-awareness has been a long journey.
Same.
And I've had a
Same.
lot of great mentors try to yank the leash and shock me. I had a manager's like, every time you start going down a certain path or you get too loud or you're selling too hard, I'm going to poke you in the rib. Well,
Wow.
that'll mess you up because it just throws
Yeah.
your flow off, right?
Yeah.
But it's a journey. Okay. I'll just say that it's a journey.
Totally a journey.
And
Yeah.
all I can say, yeah,
I'm still, every day I'm aware of that intention in me to be noticed.
I write a LinkedIn post, delete it, write it 3 times probably every day.
Yeah.
When I read it back, to ask myself, what am I actually trying to do here? Am I trying to get
Beautiful.
attention, or am I trying to share gratitude, or am I trying to bestow appreciation on somebody else or shine the light on somebody else? And is that what's really coming across in what I'm trying to say? Intentionality and self awareness take a lot of effort
They take a
because,
ton of effort. And
yeah,
I really appreciate you saying there's a constant reflection that you're doing of your intentions. When we got into the book conversation, you said, why did you write the book? And you might have heard of Brene Brown. One of the things that she says is that the longest distance information travels is from your head to your heart. And the way that the information makes that journey is through your hands. And if you open the book, the first dedication is to my younger self. I say, this is dedicated to my younger self. You were lost and confused for so long. And if no one reads this book, I wrote this for you, because I want to learn these things. I want to embody these things. And of course, as I see the fruit of that embodied in my own life, of course, I want to share it, because it's my little part of saying, here's what I believe I'm called to say that might make things a bit better. But my initial why was because I wanted this to metabolize from thoughts that I had about, these are my perspectives, these are my opinions. I wanted to embody them myself, because when you write a book, you really come up against imposter syndrome, because there's a lot of books out there. There's too many books, and everyone's saying, check out my book. And so, as someone who reads a lot of books, I was like, oh my God, do we really need one more book? Do we really need one more guy's ideas? And I had to face that. I had to look at myself in the mirror and say, like you say, every time you write a LinkedIn post, what is my real intention with this? And when I realized the writing of this book is going to change me, that's why I wrote the book. And of course, there's a hope that it helps others, but the foundational why is because I wanted this to move from my head into my heart.
Well, the last word is on this is the best songwriters, the best musicians, the best authors, and the best artists that I've ever read about, listened to, watched interviews of, whatever. They have one major thing in common, and that is that they don't do it for you, that they have a need, a burning desire, a requirement within them to get it out, and that they do it for them, that it is their therapy, it is their construction, is their need to get it out from them so that they can grow beyond that moment. And I think what you described is exactly that. If nobody ever reads your book, and if everybody who ever reads your book takes no value away, it was still worth writing because it changed
Absolutely.
you.
It's changed me.
Period. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Steve Fortunato, how do people find you? How do they learn more about you? How do they find this book? There's more to you than what we've talked about today. We can't encapsulate all of it in 45 minutes. How do people get in contact and learn more and engage with you?
If you want to get in touch with me, you can email me, Steve at stevefortunato.com. We have our company websites, room40.com. Our venue in LA is thefighousela.com, and you can get the book anywhere books are sold.
The Urgent Recovery of Hospitality by Steve Fortunato. All the links, of course, will be in the show notes, no matter where you're consuming this audio or video. And Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure. Great getting to know more about you. Thanks for coming on The Pineapple Perspective, and we wish you well.
Thank you so much for having me, Troy. Appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to The Pineapple Perspective. If you loved today's episode, leave a review and a 5-star rating. I look forward to welcoming you back next time.